Oh, hi. Do you remember when you were younger and it'd be like late at night and you'd just be up playing on like some old video game console or something and you'd like be in the dark and you'd be under covers and stuff like that? Yeah? Alright, I just want you to just visualise that. Just a moment. Just close your eyes and visualise. Okay. You can open them now. The console that comes to mind for me when I think about stuff like that is none other than the Dreamcast.
For as long as I've been into collecting games, I have been a fan of one console in particular, the Dreamcast.
No way.
It holds a special place in my heart. It was the first retro console I ever played. And of course, it is home to some of my favourite games of all time. Like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
It's my game of the year, every year.
One thing that I've always wanted to learn more about are the Dreamcast memory cards, also known as the VMUs. Standing for Visual Memory Unit, the VMU was a unique take on the old memory card system that was still pretty big at the time. This is especially apparent after the Sega Saturn's poor attempts at saving games. And I mean, I've had very limited experience with the Sega Saturn, but I do know that saving games was not its strongest point.
So let's just take a second to actually look at this thing. Obviously, the first thing we're going to notice is the screen. It's like a mini games console. And that is exactly what it is. But shelving that just for a second, let's actually just think, what is this like for actually saving games?
The VMU had a total of 200 blocks of storage. Oh, by the way, that is something I've never liked when games consoles say that the system storage is blocks. Like, bitch, shut up. We all know it's just 200 kilobytes. And I mean, Nintendo was doing this up until the 3DS. I mean, I guess it was to simplify it for kids or something, but like, what was I talking about again? Oh yeah.
Well, most consoles, like the PS2, would have you plug the memory card in, like, on the console. And that makes sense, right? Like, I'm not gonna go and plug a USB stick into a fridge. And where am I even meant to put this in? But this isn't your average console, no. This is the Sega Dreamcast. And at the Dreamcast, we plug our memory cards, assumably, into the controller, which is something the original Xbox would do a couple of years later. But, yeah. Now, you can plug up to 2 memory cards into one controller each, which gives you 8 different memory cards to be used at one time. And I prefer it to have 2 memory cards in because it adds a bit of weight to the controller and it makes it just that slight bit better to use because let's be real, the Dreamcast controller isn't the best controller ever made.
Some games actually use the VMU in some pretty clever ways. For example, Sonic Shuffle. It'd show you your card numbers on the VMU so that you could hide it from the other players in the room. You know, it's a neat concept, but it was very heavily underused.
So what is this thing actually like when it's plugged in? Well, when it's playing the game, little icons actually appear on the screen as you're playing the game, and I've always thought that's pretty cool. A bit useless, but I always do look forward to seeing what the little icon's gonna be.
If you had a lot of space in your VMU, certain games would allow you to download a little mini-game from your Dreamcast onto the VMU. But, like, you would need a lot of space for these things. The one I've used the most, Shower Adventure 2, takes up nearly 3/4 of the block count.
Now the games are pretty simple, but they are still kind of fun. Chow Adventure 2 is kind of like a Tamagotchi, but with a chow.
Again, this is a very seldom used feature, but around 20 give or take games are playable on the VMU. Some range from basic games like Breakout or something boring like a clock, but the fact that it even exists is cool enough that it gets a pass in my book. Like, don't expect anything crazy like GTA 5, but expect something like at least semi-fun. And people are still making little games for this thing to this day. Stuff like Flappy Bird and I'd imagine Doom. I just think that's pretty cool that people are still making games for, let's be real, a pretty forgettable piece of technology.
And these things can do so much more. Like, for example, this is something I learnt last year. You can connect them together. And okay, just looking at this thing, maybe it does need to be blurred a little bit, so we'll, move it down. But now it lets you play multiplayer games. Yeah, this thing has multiplayer. And I mean, set your expectations low. They're not like revolutionary multiplayer games. Like Jet Set Radio's Graffiti Transfer, which just lets you transfer custom-made graffiti from one Dreamcast to another. But it's still really fun. Like, this is so cool, and this is why I love the Dreamcast. Now, we're gonna stop lamenting and go somewhere else. Overall, the VMU was pretty good. It was doomed to fail, and we all know that. It was put onto a console that was also doomed to fail. And so, I think it gets overlooked. But I do think this thing deserves a lot more love than it gets. I mean, you do have to set your expectations before jumping into some of the games, because it is a memory card first, and a games console second. But, for what it is, it's really fun. And I mean, you can't get this anywhere else. It really feeds into the wackiness of the Dreamcast that I just love. Oh yeah, have I mentioned? I love the Dreamcast. You didn't know? I brought a book, for God's sake.